Welcome to Bets on the Future, where we highlight the various career paths in the electrifying metals world. From the vehicle you ride in to the bridge holding it up, metals are everywhere. Why not in your career too? I'm Jennifer Betts, a metals industry veteran with almost 20 years experience, here to highlight these incredible career paths as told by the women who are living them. On this week's episode of Bets on the Future, we have really an incredible guest because she comes from the sustainability world, which you would think more metals recycling individuals would be a part of. And yet we're going to get into maybe why or why not more of us aren't on that sustainability track, or maybe we're going to be recruiting more and more of those individuals like Maddie Carlson, the sustainability consultant at Shapiro. Maddie is a sustainability consultant at Shapiro, where she applies her degrees in economics and environmental studies from Eckerd College to evaluate sustainability programs for her clients using data, case studies, and efficiency evaluations. She also writes a blog called Sustainability Insights and a column called Beyond the Bin, both addressing personal and professional environmental issues. Maddie is motivated and grateful to have the opportunity to collaborate with others to create a positive impact on the environment and society. So I want to give a huge welcome to Maddie. So thank you so much for coming onto the program today. I'm very curious to hear about your background because we don't always meet sustainability consultants in the metals industry, although personally I think we should, because I'm a little biased, but I think we do some great work here. So I want to know, like, how did you get into this world?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to you. You know, you have so much background and knowledge and experience in this industry. I just looking forward to diving into some of the topics. So I didn't always have my heart set on the recycling industry. I always knew from a young kid I wanted to be in the environmental field in some way. I was a big National Geographic kid, spent as much time as I could outdoors, and would get, frustrated seeing people litter and try and think of ways that, we could do something better. So that led me to my college choice of Eckerd College. They're just a big environmental school, big environmental culture. Every student has to take an environmental course, which I think should be at every college, or every school, just to, get more education, not just about recycling, but about any environmental topic out there. And at first I felt quite overwhelmed about which sector of environmentalism do I want to go into, because I just looked around and, see everything that needed help, from sustainable fisheries to water management, forest management, microplastics, pollution, biodiversity. I mean, pick a topic and probably some part of it needs some help environmentally. And at the time, I found my place in the recycling industry kind of on accident. It was just what was the best fit for me at the time. And I was able to really apply what I learned at college through my economics and environmental, doing economic case studies about sustainable topics. So I just kind of took it from there, kept gaining more experience, especially on the plastic side, and kind of hope to continue that.
I love that your sustainability background, specifically your degree, combined it with economics, because I think a lot of individuals think about sustainability as maybe just a buzzword, and that you were applying it from a business mindset of, okay, how do we actually make the financial aspect of this make sense? Is that something that's always been, from the business sense, a part of
Yeah,
what you wanted?
I always knew I wanted to have an environmental degree and something else. I didn't know what that was going to be until I got to college. I played around with the journalism class. I took a accounting class, just kind of finding my place, and ended up having a really influential professor, Frank Hamilton. He taught me a lot. And, something he said was, I could make a room cry about all of these really sad environmental stories, show you pictures of bears starving on the ice caps. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't going to care unless it affects their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And I, really just was interested in the classes. I love the number side of things, and combining the two, the economics and the environmental, I just found like that was the avenue to get the most progress done. And I think that they fit better together than most people think that they would.
Agreed. There was a article recently talking about why we don't see the polar bears in photos on those floating pieces of ice anymore. And it's specifically about what your professor was talking about, is that they did studies on the lack of effects, essentially, that it had on individuals, that it wasn't really having the impact that the scientists really wanted on individuals, that it needed, to your point, to have more of an economic impact where people needed that financial incentive, not necessarily something from, unfortunately, the heart aspect.
Yeah. And I mean, you wish that that would be enough to have people change, or, look into something more, look into their environmental practices. But I think it's also just kind of the amount of exposure it had, especially at first. And, when people would just see it all the times, each time that they saw it, the effectiveness went down,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of lost its, meaning if you just are so exposed to pictures or stories like that. So,
Yes. Well, one thing our industry does that we haven't really exposed people to is the images, the photos, the things that we do, right? So
mm-hmm.
as you've gotten into this industry, the metal side of things, has it surprised you to see what we do in terms of the metals manufacturing, the metals recycling aspect?
Yes, I think the recycling industry of any material, but I think metals, especially learning that it's this giant commodities market that no one really knows about unless you're in it. And, I work with manufacturers, and even just getting to see how different products are made is extremely interesting. And I think that there's a large disconnect of a lot of things, whether it's between our food or our products, or where things end up, like the landfill or the recycling center. There's just there's this whole other world that a lot of people don't know of, and it's been really cool to learn about it and to help improve it and contribute to it.
I wasn't aware that after you took the aluminum can and you put it in the recycling bin, that there was this whole other commodity trading world that it went through, essentially, to then be melted down into a new can, ultimately going back onto the store shelf within 60 days. I
Mhm.
I don't know. I just thought it magically poof went into another can, went into something else. And it's been really eye-opening over the years to see what it can become. And maybe it doesn't become a can again. Maybe it becomes something else. Maybe part of my car is, an old aluminum can in some regards.
Yeah, I think another thing that was surprising for me was the different language that is surrounding, especially metal recycling. I am still learning new terms every day of, a different term for copper punching that some people in part of the country use, or, you have fluff that comes out of a shredder. That's the waste part, the plastic part. I mean, it's just, they have this whole list of different terms that it still surprises me, and I think will continue. I don't think I'll ever be able to memorize all of them. So that was something too that was a bit of a culture shock, coming in and learning about all the different names for the really specific types of not only metal, but the form that they come in.
Yes. And for those that are listening, this podcast does span the full metal supply chain. So some individuals that are on more of the OEM side of things, the shredder, the automobile shredder, does essentially separate the vehicle or other metallics that are essentially combined together into smaller pieces. And if there are non-metallics in there, I'm very much glossing over a lot of parts here, but the non-metallics that come out of the shredder, yes, are deemed fluff, and they have a variety of names sometimes. And it's a very interesting byproduct that you see. And there are actually companies now that are going back through and seeing if there are ways to either use that material either as landfill cover or being able to use it as energy in incinerators or other opportunities, so that it's not essentially waste, that material can be used, so the shredders can be essentially 100% recycled materials coming out of, or usable, I should say, materials coming out of there.
Yeah, the shredder is great for those pieces that you can't manually disassemble to recycle each different metal component in there. And I think that it's great. There's working on innovations to take care of even the fluff, so even a higher percentage is reused.
For those who may not understand the term sustainability consultant, or may not be aware of what Shapiro is or does, can you give kind of a broad example of what Shapiro does, and then give an example or a broad coverage of what you do as a sustainability consultant?
Yeah, absolutely. So Shapiro is a 120-year-old company. Started off as just a normal scrap company dealing with mostly metals, and we have just continued to expand our different materials, and in the last couple of years focused on including non-metals as well. So plastic, wood, cardboard, paper, and additionally, using as many equipment as much as I'll rephrase that part. I'll say, also adding in equipment where needed to make the process as efficient as possible by reducing the transportation needed, because that's additional CO2 that we want to avoid. And so everything that we do is post-manufacturing, but pre-consumer. So after a product is already getting put together or assembled, the parts of that are excess material, or maybe things that didn't come out right, didn't pass the quality inspection, are things that we recycle. So things that don't hit the market, or maybe there are some intellectual property that they're testing a new product, and they're just going through the engineering phase, seeing if it works, and it's not going to market, but it is, in the testing phase, and then scrap once they figure out a new way or want to make a more official product. And we work from anywhere from a pontoon boat to a large shipping container. We do, you could probably name a manufacturing industry and we'll probably have a client or two in it. Yeah, that's a very wide range. And again, why I said it's really interesting getting to see a lot of different products being made. And so we help out with total recycling programs. And also if, we think that something should be, we also do a lot of unique material research. So right now I'm trying to find a home for carbon fiber. There's some cool innovation coming out there, but it's not super accessible to everyone. And at least for when it comes, we'll be ready for it, because a lot of places right now, it's just unfortunately being landfilled, which you have to actually cure it before. So it takes a lot of energy to cure it and then being sent to the landfill. So it's just kind of, it's even worse, compared to some other materials. So just finding unique homes for places is what we try and do. And one of our mottos is find and fix the hard stuff. So while this wasn't a big project, another one that we did was they have wooden wheels that metal coils were wrapped on, and we
Okay.
ended up donating them to the local zoo for their goat enclosure. And because those goats are loving to they love to hop from high places and, have a jungle gym. So kind of thinking out the box where we can. Um, and another part that I've helped add to and what we're building on is also just tracking emissions through it. We have a web portal that tracks every pickup, every material, the commodity price, the formula that we put it on, but then also the CO2 emissions for the transportation side of it. So we're looking at what their payload is, how, making sure that it's as high as possible, what an increase would look like in CO2 reduction, and giving them an efficiency score. So, if their production increases, their scrap is going to increase. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing if their, you know, scrap per transportation or per unit is better. So that's what we're looking for is that growth still under a level of, making sure that it's transported in the best, most efficient way, which is also the most sustainable.
That's pretty interesting because I was actually talking to one of your colleagues the other day, and they were discussing about some of the industries that you go into. And in some of the businesses that I've dealt with, it's typically metals manufacturers, or it's manufacturers that obviously have products that have metal in them, right? But that's not necessarily the case for y'all. Like, they referenced essentially, a large national company that would come to you and possibly be a client of yours. Like that could be like a potential client of yours. And it's very fascinating, the opportunities that you're providing them because of your knowledge in the recycling world. Based on what you just shared, you've got a lot of knowledge and experience. And I'm kind of curious, when you were going through your sustainability classes, the environmental classes, were there a lot of discussions around the metals manufacturing aspect of things? And I asked that because of the carbon footprint. For instance, like steel has such a large, and percentage wise, on a global scale, like it's around like 8 to 9%, and it has such a relative impact, right? Versus, does it get as much airtime in terms of what can we do to reduce that?
I learning more about it in my professional career, I'm surprised it wasn't a larger topic in my studies. Part of that is, when we are in upper level courses, a lot of them are project or research based. And if you didn't, you could choose the steel industry, for example, as a topic. That's not one that I did. And so I think part of that is just the structure of the courses and what you choose to pursue or research. But I don't think that it was enough. A lot of it had to do with trade and international trade because the metals go all over the world, or materials in general are manufactured and shipped all over the world. And so that was always a piece of the puzzle that we looked, but we had such a holistic view on all sustainability and environmentalism that it was it was definitely a part of it, and the recycling in general, but the intricacies of the metals market was not something that was a heavy focus, and something I really learned a lot more at Shapiro, specifically about, the pricing, which I'm still learning a lot of, and how, that changes, and how the rest of the world and economics contributes to it. And it's just like I mentioned earlier, it's just something that not a lot of people know is existing, and it's just going on in the background of everything that we do.
It's pretty fascinating. I always like to recommend the book The World for Sale by Javier Baez, and I apologize to his co-writer. I always forget his co-author, his name. But The World for Sale is always a very interesting book because it's basically like James Bond meets international commodity trader. But it talks about essentially the commodity market and what goes on behind the scenes to essentially move oil, to move metals, to move grains, to move a lot of those things, and how those markets essentially developed from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and how we get a lot of our large trading houses today, and that it still goes on today. And most people are just none the wiser to what goes on behind the scenes. And that kind of lends into what we've been seeing with, some of them ish. I'll be allegedly, for the lawyers out there. What we've seen with a little bit of the greenwashing of what's happening out there, where maybe they buy one recycling company to offset maybe all the mining companies that they
Mm-hmm.
own, for instance. You know, from the environmental horses to your career in sustainability before you came to Shapiro, I have to imagine greenwashing has been, unintended, a hot topic in that world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I would love to see someone else's perspective on this sometimes, because to me, I can spot it very easily. But I forget often that this is my job, this is what I've studied, this is my passion, and not everyone is like that. And I think that it's a really big concern, and something that I think there's actually a new category coming out that is newer to me. There's the top tier one that is the traditional definition of greenwashing, a company saying that this is made out of 100% recycled material, or it is 100% recyclable. Oftentimes it's not. They just say that.
Mhm.
Um, and, or saying, um, we saved, you know, 284 tons of CO2 this year by doing this thing. And that's just not actually true. They don't have the numbers to back it up. And they don't cite their sources. They don't give a background of how they've come to these numbers. So that's kind of the traditional greenwashing. And then I categorize the next one as marketing greenwashing. So where you use the colors green and blue, and you use hot topic words like eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, you know, toxic free, these terms aren't regulated. You can put that on anything that you would like. You could put that on a plastic water bottle full of lead if you wanted to. There is nothing that's stopping you. Well, and the solution for some of that, mostly the top tier, is legal restrictions, saying, hey, if you lie about your environmental impact, there is going to be fines through this. That only goes so far because you can't put a legal restriction on a color like green. So some of that is just going to be having to educate the public a little bit more of what does it actually mean to be eco-friendly, and kind of avoid those products that are, using it as just a key term. But a new one that I have been coming across more often, and I don't quite have, I'll say, like a term for it yet, but I'll just say that they're not giving the full story on their environmental impact. And I think some of it is not on purpose. Sometimes it is just their job or something an aspect that they didn't know about. Maybe they didn't come from an environmental background and they were given some EHS tasks to fill that role. And, sometimes you're gathering the environmental data and a marketing team only chooses a couple pretty numbers to present. And some of them is a little bit closer to the tier one of, kind of purposely omitting details, like saying, oh, we recycled 100 tons this past year. And that's very branded, on a website. But then what's not included is the number of tons they sent to the landfill or the percentage that they recycled rather than just the hard number of they recycled. Because if that sounds great until you see the number that they actually sent 500 tons to the landfill, or they, have a toxin-free product, but it's shipped from all over the world. And, the emissions with that, correlated with that is just astronomical. So it is a little bit of a foggier definition of greenwashing. And, are guilty or not guilty is what I've been saying in a couple of conversations recently. And it's not all bad intentions. It's really not, but it's still some of them is having the same impact of not giving the full story. And some of it is people just truly building their environmental program and they don't have the data for every single environmental piece. But, a lot of times, on the other hand, this isn't a very good look for us. We're not going to present this number. And, soon a lot more companies will have to, through regulations, have to report those numbers, but it's not going to be the case for everyone. And, kind of at the end of the day, we can't necessarily rely on regulations to guide us through this. We're already behind compared to Europe. And, there's going to be a time too that people need to kind of step up and do the right thing and say, hey, this isn't a great number. Our energy uses is kind of off the charts, but at least we know and we're working on it. And this is our full sustainability report.
I do have to give a brief shout out to I'll say the North American metals manufacturing market from a global perspective, because I've had these conversations about how in our market, there are some people, especially from I'll say scrap world, because there's been some rebranding from scrap to recycled materials, essentially the metal recycling facilities. They've thought of it as like a bit of greenwashing because they consider it still sometimes a dirty, profession. And yeah, sometimes it can appear to be so. But then I have to point out, what's the alternative? If you're not urban mining, essentially taking the existing metals that you've already essentially refined from ore, and you've already processed it into the metallics that you have today, what's the alternative? The alternative is from scratch, which is more energy intensive and by comparison, a dirtier process, more CO2, less sustainable. And so when you start putting into those perspectives and you take a look at the North American market of how we have more access to scrap / recycled materials for the metals world versus other regions around the world, we do fairly well in that regard. Can we do better? Yes. But, even the greenwashing in our world, on the metals manufacturing side, still comes up, because I've had conversations about knowing products have recycled materials in them. For instance, automobiles. automobiles in the United States have a decent percentage of recycled metals in them. Washer and dryers have a decent percentage of recycled materials in them. There's a lot of recycled metallics in existing products today, and they won't market it because they go down a very technical path of, well, we can't necessarily guarantee that every single particular product has gotten that particular coil that has exactly that percentage of the point, whatever percentage of the recycled metallic in it. So we're not going to put it on there. They went like so far the other
Could they
direction.
could they do like a combination of all, say, hey, out of all the cars we've, produced this year, it equates to this much metal and about this percent of it is recycled material? I mean, do they have to do it per car? Because I totally agree with you that um I think the mindset on scrap is changing recycled material, even though that maybe is not how it was once pictured. But yeah, like you said, looking at what we would be doing instead, it would be a lot worse. So
Yes. They're starting to think about it. There are some products that are out there where maybe you with like Web3 and tokenization and blockchains, you can actually start tracking the particular shipment through the full supply chain to actually be able to say with the OEM, this is exactly the percentage of the recycled metallics that would be going into your product. That's not necessarily available for every OEM currently. So we're not quite there yet. So they're probably not going to do it for every product. So you got some work to go
yeah,
on.
it's just hard when there's just so much. There's so many really specific alloys and they're going all over the country, the world. It's definitely a hard process to track for sure.
Yes, very much so. Kind of still keeping in the metal space and a little bit more on the demographic of the metals industry as well as like the environmental world. I've noticed in the past year when I've kind of crossed over into the sustainability world a handful of times. In my career, I've been pretty much in a male dominated industry, steel, metals manufacturing. Steel, I think, is around 20% female. When I go over to sustainability, to conferences, to just online, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's more than 20%. And so is that something that you noticed in your classes X number of years ago? If that's a switch, if there was an increase, if it's, an industry that's attracting.
Yeah, I would say it's a uh very it's very different depending on what specific sector. So I'll give some examples. So my classes, I would say it was almost 50-50.
Okay.
Really, really similar marks for male and female. But actually being in the workforce has definitely been male dominated. I mean, and part of that is because I often don't work with other sustainability teams. Sometimes I do, and it's been increasingly more, but it's oftentimes, a plant manager that is in charge of the scrap, or the facilities person, and someone that's maybe not designated as an environmental position. So it hasn't quite translated the same since college through that. And I also just know there's a lot of people who have environmental degrees who aren't working in the environmental sector because there's just not a lot of entry level positions to start. And also, a lot of times, if there isn't a specific environmental team, they will pull people who are already in the company and give them that position, or someone who has a managing experience to to more so of like a team leader, project manager, not necessarily someone who has the environmental qualifications for it, which is, you know, I understand that companies need to, having someone internal, for example, is really helpful. It does make me a little concerned because we're going to need more and more environmental executives coming up. And there's going to be this gap of people who don't have the experience because they're not getting there's not enough of the internships, the entry level jobs to get people with their foot in the door and get experience and to contribute. And not to say that, someone who is, in a project management role can't contribute, but there are certain nuances that, that's why you have an environmental degree, and things like, unintentionally greenwashing because it wasn't something that they are aware about. It's not a necessarily a negative thing towards them. It's just they were probably tasked with something that they weren't fully educated on. So going back to the women in the industry, I think that it is getting better. I think getting younger people in the door too is getting better. I think it's really important to show that you have females in executive positions. You can't just say that you support women in manufacturing or women in scrap and then not have any women in leadership. And I would be curious about, other environmental fields too. But I think that it's definitely getting better in the scrap and metal world.
Agreed. For those that are interested in getting into the metals, the manufacturing, recycling, sustainability worlds, do you have any advice for them now that you've been in the industry for a while?
I would say one is always advocate for your safety. The scrap metal industry is one of the most dangerous places to work. So make sure, even if you're a guest in a facility, gotta make sure you're having the correct PPE. That is something that the whole industry I know is concerned about, but that's one thing is very important to Shapiro and to I know a lot of other people. So that would be my first one, is whether you're just doing a tour of a facility because you're wanting to learn more, or if you're on the job or that's the site that you work at, it is always something to put at the forefront of everyone's mind. Other things about the recycling industry, getting in there, I would say, take as many informational interviews as you can. I called a ton of Eckerd alumni and I was like, hey, tell me about your job. I just want to learn what you do and what's actually the processes behind it and what helped you. So that's something that I would always recommend to really any young professional in general. And I would say, having a deeper knowledge of the recycling processes is definitely helpful. Something that helped me. I've been to so many different MRFs, waste energy sites, landfills, been on the ground where they're giant claws scooping things up into incinerators. Definitely not glamorous, but getting that experience, boots on the ground has been really great for my career and understanding the actual processes of what's going on behind the recycling, just raw material, once it gets to the site, what actually happens to it. And metal is definitely in that as well, looking at the different furnaces and smelters and the different ways that metal is melted and mixed together is just really important and something that would just give a really good foundation for anyone looking to get into the recycling industry.
And before we go, because I just have to say huge thank you for your time today, for your expertise, sharing everything that you've, shared with us thus far. Is there anything that we've missed? Any points that you wanted to cover? Any topics that, maybe we didn't get to in our short amount of time today?
No, I'll just say one, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun to chat with you about all these things. And I'll just say I'm always looking to be a resource for anyone who has questions. If anyone is listening and wants to reach out or have a question, a follow-up question on what we talked about or something that's maybe not even directly in one of our topics, love to help out my clients, and that's the goal, to continue to improve that. But I also just love to be a resource for anyone who's looking to get some more questions about the recycling industry.
And for those that are listening slash watching, what's the best way to get a hold of you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn works for sure.
Wonderful. Well, Maddie Carlson, sustainability consultant, Shapiro, thank you so much for coming on today. This was really wonderful. It was great to kind of step outside the metals world, kind of rope it in a little bit, but it was really wonderful to get a slightly different slash adjacent perspective of, what we're a part of. And it's pretty cool to see, the different careers that exist out there. So just really appreciate what you're a part of, what you're working on at Shapiro, and everything that you're bringing to the metals industry. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again.